Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are joining us from. We're here today with Mason Giles, who is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer for Comet Backup. Welcome, Mason.
Thanks for having me, Scott.
We were just talking a minute ago. This is the second time you and I have done one of these, so I appreciate you joining us and having this discussion.
You must like me if I'm allowed to come back.
Well, we like the whole Comet team, but yes, Mason, we've had a great chat the last time. I'm sure we'll have another good chat this time. Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong. You are located in Christchurch, New Zealand. Is that right?
That's correct. Bright and early, 8 a.m. So it's a bright sunny day out my window. Still on my first coffee of the day.
All right. So the way I start all these things with good morning, good afternoon, it's your morning and my afternoon because it's 4 o'clock on the nose here in South Carolina. So yeah, that's excellent. Well, I guess the topic of the day is backup security for MSPs. So that is on everybody's mind right now. As an MSP owner myself, we all have it drilled in our heads. We've got to do backups. We've got to take care of our clients, and we need to perform backups so that in an event that our client or our own data, for that matter, has a problem, gets compromised, your client gets ransomware, anything, we should be able to take that back up and restore it. But we need to also include security measures, how to protect that client data. And I think that's what we'll talk about today. Is that good with you?
You've really summed it up. That's, I think, where you've set the tone. That's pretty much where we're heading. Yep.
Awesome. Well, so let's start with what steps should companies take to maximize, the data and security of the backups?
Right. Well, step one is you should have backups, and it's a pretty predictable response since I work on developing backup software. Okay. But of course, they're important things to have when the security event happens. But just talking in the abstract about data security, you need 1,000 different things. You need email scanning, you need access logs on everything, phishing training, your AV, obviously, but EDR, XDR, maybe a contract with a 24-hour SOC. Network segmented with VLANs, you just need everything, right? You need everything from door locks to two-factor, background checks on the cleaning staff.
Mason, it can almost make your head spin with all the information that MSPs have to keep up with to maintain proper backup security, proper backups, do everything right for their clients. How do MSPs keep up?
Right, and so the list is just massive, right? There's so many things to consider, and that's even without considering like compliance requirements if you're SOC 2 or HIPAA are involved. So it's really impossible to go through such a long, list of things like this without some kind of focus and question. And so for security, all your questions should start with an attack model, a threat model. You've got to ask yourself, who or what am I trying to defend against? Because the answer to that question makes a really big difference to what defenses you put up. So let's talk about a pretty normal threat model, which is ransomware coming into your clients, delivered by a phishing email. So you start with that and you look at what happens. So the first thing is that someone gets the email. Well, sure would be nice if the anti-spam blocked it. So chalk one up for a good email scanning product. Sure. Someone clicks on the email. Well, ideally they would know the signs of a phishing email and know not to click on it. So you can think about a phishing training services for your clients. The customer downloads it and runs the attachment. Well, at this point, you really want your antivirus to do some kind of detection, signature, heuristic, and stop it from running. So you should have an antivirus that's well reviewed, update definitions, remotely managed, just something to double check. The customers run this thing as their own user account on Windows. Most ransomware will try and elevate themselves to running as administrator. If the customer is running a normal Windows account with UAC, you should know that UAC has a lot of holes in it, since Microsoft have said for years that it's not technically a security feature.
And you're talking about just having the end user as a standard user versus administrative rights. Okay.
Exactly. So in that case, you've really got to, the EDR's heuristics should catch in. But, even if the customer only has a limited, standard user account, there can be real privilege escalation vulnerabilities to get that malware up to running as administrator. So you really want to have all the security holes patched, keep up to date with Windows updates, make sure everyone's on supported versions of Windows. There's no Server 2003 running in a warehouse somewhere.
Okay.
It's probably a sore point for a lot of people still. And the
Getting
last
the
thing that ransomware,
client, you bring up a point, because a lot of our clients, it's the MSP's job to explain the liability of that server 2003, its end
yeah,
of life, and they're not supporting it anymore. But the MSP is put in between a rock and a hard place, because the client ultimately doesn't want to buy a new server.
yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It is.
Well, this is just one layer, right? There's all of the
Yeah.
email anti-spam things, and then sure, you've got a great big hole at this layer, but there are other layers, so it's not the end of the world, but you should do something about it. And the last thing that ransomware does, once it's got through all of these things, starts replacing files with encrypted versions. And if the file system permissions were pretty strict, then it wouldn't be able to do this. So there's another thing to consider is lock down your file system permission and so on. But it's just about taking that concept of what's happening. The ransomware is coming in by email, and what defenses do you want along the way to stop it? And this kind of thinking from the threat model first, is a quite useful and concrete approach to maximize your data security. Just think about how that attack might possibly be successful, and work backwards from there to the defenses that you wish you had. And the answers that you come up with are quite different for the different threat models. Just talking about email delivered ransomware, but if you've got servers in the building, you'll want to think about alarms, BitLocker, things like that. But in variable, you have to defend successfully every time, and the attacker only has to win once. And when they do win, all you can do is restore from backup. So that's kind of your final stand.
So I think your main point there is you got to think like an attacker to come up with a good, solid foundation and game plan. That makes total sense to me. Definitely. So, in addition, those layers that you talked about, we all have been trained that layers are so important. There's not one silver bullet that's going to stop ransomware or a major attack on a client or your own MSP. So what are some steps that MSPs can take? I mean, I know we can lock down permissions, like you said. What are some major steps that MSPs can take to make sure that their clients are best protected, in addition to creating a thinking like an attacker approach?
Right. So I guess the main point there is that we're talking about defense in depth. We're talking about layering multiple protections together.
Sure.
And as long as the protections are independent, there's a real benefit in doing this. So the threat has to break through all of the layers, and then backup is the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. It's reactive instead of preventative. If you're resorting to your backups, that means you've got problems in the present, and ideally those, you wouldn't be having those problems, and that's where you want those preventative layers to kick in first. And backup is just the last line of defense, so it needs to be rock solid, needs to be there in an emergency. And if ransomware has broken through all of your other defenses, then you do need to restore from backup. And simply having a backup is going to save you 9 times out of 10. But you've just raised a question of what can we do to make those backups safe from ransomware. And that's a really interesting point, because there's 9 times out of 10, having that backup is just going to save you and everything will be fine. There's 1 time out of 10 where the ransomware, like a sufficiently advanced ransomware, would be able to break into the backup storage and delete all that data too, or encrypt all your backups and render them useless. So that's definitely a pretty major concern. But the short answer is, in terms of the kind of layered model, is that Comet is just a backup software, and it needs to store data somewhere.
Okay.
And it's not a replacement for all your other layers. And for argument's sake, let's say your backups are configured to go to an external hard drive. It's not a great solution, but it's a solution.
And that is That is a situation I can think of right off the bat that an
Yeah,
attacker would go in and try to compromise a local backup
yeah,
versus a cloud backup.
exactly. And so if ransomware comes through with admin credentials, just it'll run riot over any external hard drive, of course. But even with cloud backup, for instance, if ransomware manages to become administrator, it can install a debugger and hook right into Comet's brain while Comet's running, and extract the cloud credentials, the NAS password, or something, and it does depend on exactly how advanced the ransomware is. If it knows Comet, if it knows how to get credentials out of a running Comet backup service, as to whether or not it could move laterally into the cloud even. But it is possible. 9 times out of 10, you don't need to worry about it, but there's 1 time out of 10 that ransomware will break into Comet and attack the backup storage directly. And Comet is just a backup software. There's not a lot we can do about this because Comet needs to talk to that storage. So it's somewhat an operational concern, but Comet backup does play very nicely with this operational concern. So to defend against this kind of attack, you just need one more layer, which I think is a great way of thinking about it. You just need one more layer, and that is a new security boundary that neither Comet nor ransomware acting as if it's Comet can bypass this extra layer. And so as a storage vendor, if you take a disk snapshot using VSS or LVM, ZFS, we all know that malware can delete a VSS snapshot on your PC.
Okay.
But if that VSS snapshot is on a completely different PC and there's only a very limited API between those two PCs, then there's no way that malware can delete that remote storage snapshot. So as a service provider, if you're selling storage space on your hard drives, you can use disk snapshotting at your end as a security layer for the customer. And similarly with cloud storage providers, we've worked quite closely recently with Wasabi Cloud Storage with their S3 compatible bucket versioning feature, and also Backblaze B2 and their lifecycle policy feature. And so it's possible with the right settings where you just get this cloud storage, and these providers are very affordable at roughly $5 per terabyte per month. And it's really a game changer just having that cheap storage available, because it's possible with the right settings. You let Comet upload to this cloud storage, right?
Sure.
So we're doing backups to cloud storage. And even if ransomware is running as administrator, it's got its fingers in Comet's brain, it's got the Wasabi keys, it's got the Backblaze keys, it's connected to Wasabi and it's trying to delete data, then on the storage platform, there's an option that just says, we've got this immutable snapshot, we can roll back everything. And so yeah, we've just got this whole new layer, and it's somewhat independent of Comet, but Comet works really well with it. And you can just go keep everything for an extra 30 days. And it's just impossible to delete, impossible to roll back. So just another layer. It's like the modern day version of air gapping, basically. And none of these layers can stop ransomware individually, but the more layers you add, you're strategically much more likely to be able to recover from a compromise.
Interesting. So you could look at that as a backup for a backup.
Yeah, in some sense. Yeah.
I gotcha. So look, let's say the worst happens. Let's say that you get a call and your client is compromised. What is the first thing that you should do as an IT professional when you get that bad news? Where do IT people go wrong when they're dealing with something?
Yeah. Obviously, it depends on the exact type of compromise, but the rule of thumb, I think, is that the old days of maybe you can, clean the PC, they're over. Shut everything down. Do not turn it back on. You don't know what it's doing. It might be moving, this event incident might be moving laterally, further out into your network and infecting other machines. It might be stealing credentials, might be monitoring password entries, sending spam, encrypting files, worming its way deeper into your system. Just turn it all off immediately, and don't turn it back on. Even the best malware, the most advanced malware in the world, is completely stopped by a little trick called the power button. So that's
I love it, but good point.
I mean, you don't know what it's doing, so you have to expect the worst. And ransomware, pains me to say this a little bit, but ransomware is almost good in a sense because it's very obvious when you're compromised, and the attacker's motivation is quite clear. They've got your stuff, they've got your files, your data, but it's not personal. They don't care about you. All they want is your money. And the social contract with ransomware is, this is a bit taboo, but you can actually pay them to get the data back. And if that wasn't true, the whole model would fall apart. It is true, you can pay them, and they've got better support desks than a lot of companies I've worked with.
Oh, wow.
But you probably shouldn't pay them. I think it's illegal in the US at the moment. And after paying, you're still left with a vulnerable PC, a vulnerable network, and you could have just got your files from backup anyway. So, just my advice there is to rely on the backup. The other good thing about ransomware compared to the worst case scenario, and I suppose you can't rely on this being the case, but in general with ransomware, the files are just encrypted where they're found. Just found some files on disk and encrypt them right there. They're not leaked anywhere. They're not uploaded to the ransomware gang online, partly because people still have slow internet speeds, but also partly because the ransomware gang probably couldn't afford to store it all because so much gets ransomware every day. But generally, we can't say for sure, but generally the data is not leaked. And it is far, far worse if the data is leaked or if there's a silent infection rather than something that clearly advertises its presence like ransomware does.
So I have, you're talking about data leakage, and I have read some articles about some high profile law firms that have been compromised. They have had ransomware deployed, but I think the criminal gangs are getting smart to the fact that a lot of these people have backups. So when they do infect the target with ransomware, I think that now one of the things that I've heard that they're doing that's pretty commonplace is they're actually uploading all of the client's data to them. So they have a copy of that data, and then that's really part of the ransom as well. So that really, it puts everybody in a bad spot. But I guess that's the evolution of ransomware as it is. Certainly we all need backups for that goes without saying. But it's really sad when they target a corporation and they upload 100 terabytes of confidential information. So if you don't pay the ransom, we're going to leak it on the dark web. So kind of
a big news about that recently was Lapsus and Okta.
Was it
and Nvidia?
You said Lexus?
Lapsus, L-A-P.
Oh, okay, yeah. The ransomware Lapsus. Okay, I thought you meant the car manufacturer. No. I've heard of Lapsus. So, with Nvidia, right? They wanted, wasn't it that they wanted basically to go in and they didn't like the LHR cards, and they were trying to tell them, as threatening them to take off the LHR so that they could be used for Bitcoin mining.
Yeah. Not only that, the other thing they wanted them to do was open source the Nvidia driver, which is something Linux users have been asking for a very long time. And that's a noble cause, but this, hacking like this is not the right way to
the way they went around
that done.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a little over my head.
Lapsus is they're going a little bit beyond the run of the mill ransomware. I think the Lapsus main MO is actually related to insider threats. I think they just bribed staff who had access.
God. So it's like they use any trick in the book, anything and everything. It's all open game now. Wow.
Most ransomware is drive-by. It's not personal. This thing's going out to 100,000 email addresses. We'll see who gets hit. But the Nvidia one was personal. And when it's personal, you'd expect this kind of leakage to happen. But when it's not personal, it's just business.
I've been in IT for so long. I remember the first sign evidence of ransomware. I saw several ransomware attacks that, by pure definition today, were not ransomware. They would have a message that would pop up and say, your files are encrypted. You have ransomware. Here's the Bitcoin wallet address to send Bitcoin to. But all you had to do was reboot the machine. Warning, your files will be destroyed if you reboot this machine. It was one of those things that they wanted to scare you, and they technically didn't encrypt your files. They didn't do anything. They just locked your computer up with a message on your screen that could easily be defeated by rebooting the computer.
Just
So
that fake it till you make it kind of
yeah,
mentality.
yeah, but then they actually started locking files, and I guess that was a year or two down the road. But God, that seems like that was probably, I don't know, 2014, 13, somewhere around there when we first started seeing ransomware, and it actually they said it was, but it wasn't, and then I don't know, it's just seemed to really get nasty and evolve.
There's a few things that happened around that time, huh? You'll notice every website in the world is HTTPS now. But
yeah,
for a long time, they were just plain HTTP, even around that time in 2014. And nowadays, we're all conditioned to think, oh, plain HTTP website, immediately insecure. But wow, we, as a collective industry, we spent 30 years just using plain HTTP websites. And there's a lot of things that contributed to getting everyone up to HTTPS. One of the things was Chrome and Firefox having the big push to say the not secure in the address bar, and Google Chrome with the SEO prioritizing HTTPS websites. The other big thing was that Intel put hardware AES into the CPU. So CPUs can encrypt and decrypt quite a lot faster now than they used to be able to back in the day. So that's obviously really beneficial for HTTPS and securing all your web traffic, but it does also mean that ransomware can encrypt files faster than it might have been able to back in the past.
The technology continues to evolve and get better and better, and even for the cyber criminals. So excellent point. Well, listen, what are some of the, can you talk through some of the hazards of being compromised for both the organization who gets compromised and for the IT professional who supports them? What are some things IT professionals take for granted when they try when one of their clients get compromised?
Right. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of hazards of being compromised, and there's it's very easy to point out the obvious things of like, you're compromised, this stuff's not working, and needing to stop that compromise as soon as possible. But yeah, there's a lot more to it. The reputation of your business is something that is very easy to take for granted until it's too late. I don't know if you remember your Othello, he that filches from me my good name. And I've been thinking a lot about ConnectWise lately. Obviously, they had their major incident in 2020. It's been 18 months already, but wow. we all even now we all still think twice when you hear ConnectWise, which is a bit unfortunate for them, because it wasn't entirely their fault. And
sure.
But you have to imagine being in their shoes. Someone who had an absolutely major world news kind of ransomware event, and it just being a completely different business environment for them to operate under now. Like, it must be really difficult for them to just do the normal things they normally do. So that's one thing.
I can definitely see your point. Any organization, whether they're big or small, is going to take a brand hit. People are going to remember that and associate it with the brand. And, that brand impact is definitely there.
Yeah, it's hard to put into numbers exactly how much that might affect you if you mostly have local business or international business or something. But so that's one thing, the brand's reputational impact. From a corporate point of view, what actually happens when you get compromised is that recovery is a big project, and there's lots of practical project management stuff to consider. You might have reporting requirements. In the US, there's not the US, in the EU, there's the DPO for GDPR, the ISO standards. This is an American show, so it's SOC 2 standards, CCPA and CPRA if you're in California, and HIPAA, of course. But before you even get to that point, another thing that's often taken for granted until it's too late is the organization actually needs to still have the capability to recover. And if you're working with an IT provider that's got a good handle on the systems for that client, then that's great. But I've worked with some enterprises that had like internal IT team, and they had a brain drain over a period of time, and they sort of lost key staff and key capabilities in terms of how their IT systems even worked. And I see that as being a real risk factor. Just circling back to that Windows Server 2003 box in a warehouse somewhere. If you don't know how to get everything back up and running, you will be paying in either time or in money, and you've only got a certain amount of runway as a business where you can be not making any income before it starts to really cause some significant existence risks for your business. So one thing I would say is sort out those Server 2003 boxes. Make sure that you do know how to set up all the infrastructure again, and all the vendor software. I think is probably a big part of that, and figure out how long you could potentially be down for as a red line, and make sure that you can recover your backups faster than that. The speed of recovery for backups is a pretty important factor. You've got backups, but how long does it take to download them again? And quite a lot of providers might be surprised if they're using, so-and-so backup software and the backups have been working fine. But AWS Glacier is a really interesting one. AWS Glacier is probably some of the cheapest storage out there on the market at about $2 per terabyte per month. It's incredibly cheap. And the way it works, cold storage. And when you need something back, there's a 48-hour turnaround. And even then, the downloads are slow and they're insanely expensive to get the data back. And so that's like a quite unexpected. If you just look at the headline is super cheap storage, but the small print is really difficult to get that data back when you need it in a hurry, when the whole business is down. So that's a real risk factor. So speed of recovery. And the last thing I want to say about, what are the unexpected things in a compromise is the whole time that you're recovering from this ransomware event or compromise event or whatever, you're going to be thinking in the back of your mind, how did this happen? What stops it from happening again? And if ransomware is involved, you ask yourself some pretty deep questions. Like often people will see paying the ransom as a possible option to get things back online pretty quickly, especially if your backups are slow to restore. But how did the threat get in? Aren't you just as hackable afterwards? And it's
could it be argued that they would be a bigger target moving forward because they knew they got money the first time out of them? Let's hit them again.
And you've got the same staff, and the same staff is susceptible to the same kind of phishing emails. You've got the same systems, and
nothing's changed except they paid the ransom.
Exactly. And at the same time, this is a pretty stressful time in terms of getting your existing IT systems back up. Do you want to go through with a whole, system change procedure at the same time is a pretty big ask. So lots to think about.
In your opinion, those companies who don't have adequate backups, what happens when they don't pay the ransom? Do they have to basically start over?
Yeah, I guess so. And that's kind of a business ending event for a lot of companies. If you lose your business database, your vendor software, your email history, I know at our company we develop software, backup software, obviously. And if we lost all our source code, I don't know what we'd do.
It would definitely put a major crimp in the operations of your day-to-day business.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, that brings up a valid point, and I may have asked you this in a previous live stream that you did with me, but that I think it gets down as well to the MSPs and how often are they testing those backups to verify that they work? Because what about an MSP who I can just think of the scenario: the client, they're charging their client good money to do backups for them. The client gets hit with ransomware. And then what happens when the MSP says, oh, no problem, client, we can go ahead and just restore from backups. And then they go to those backups and all of a sudden they don't work.
But it's such a hard conversation.
Yeah, they've been backing up for 4 years every day. But, that MSP never took the time to test that restore and validate that those backups actually will work if we need them.
I've been on both sides of this conversation, and it is not fun for anyone, especially when you think how much money you're paying for the service the whole time, and this whole time was it worthless or something? But yeah, it comes down to layers, testing your restores, and a little bit of proactive monitoring, I think, can go a long way here.
Yep, definitely. Well, so ransomware is a hot topic among IT professionals in the IT industry. What happens when the MSP accidentally deletes the data? Do you see that as they're trying to restore? And everyone's on I won't say everyone's edgy, but everyone's extremely I don't know. Everyone's in a weird position because mentally they're trying to focus. They've got so many things on their mind. How often do you see MSP pros go in and accidentally delete the data?
That's it definitely happens in the stress of the moment, and I think there's quite a lot of different ways that different people respond to it. I've worked with a lot of IT people over the years, and I remember there was one time we had a double RAID disk failure or something like that, and it was a pretty stressful situation for everyone. And there are two people on call at the time, and one person was kind of panicking and but very agitated, doing things, getting drives, plugging things in, F-disking, just making things happen. And the other guy was calm and collected. He just very procedural, right? This is what's happening. Did not break a sweat at all. And it's really interesting to see the different types of people and the way they respond under stress. I don't think that's something you can really interview for. And hopefully you just never end up in this situation. But it's, I wouldn't really say one of these people was more effective or less effective than the other, but I definitely know which one would have been more likely to make a mistake in the heat of the moment. And so that's a really interesting point. But just talking about ransomware and the stress of accidental deletion and all of this is kind of extreme cases. The most common accidental deletion that you see is actually the customer just deleted their own files and needs them back from the backup. And maybe they can get their files, deleted their Excel file, deleted their QuickBooks.
And the IT person is the hero when they can use that backup and get it back.
Exactly. Maybe the customer can even get it back from OneDrive themselves these days and don't even need to contact you. But Comet has lots of features for backing up Exchange servers, Office 365, SQL servers, whole disk images, Hyper-V, Linux, and so on. And we love to talk about these big flashy features, but our bread and butter is just everyday file level backup. And it's very easy to select files for backup and restore in Comet. We live and breathe file backup. And so in terms of accidental deletion from the customer's point of view, it's very easy for if you the IT service provider world has got kind of high touch service providers. The customer should call them up and the service provider will do everything. Or there's kind of low touch service providers where most of the access will be unlocked. The customer will just do their own thing. So it's up to you if you enable self-service access for the customer to go into the system tray, open the app, and click the restore button and do a restore themselves. So that's one option there. It's quite easy to use. But otherwise, the customer can contact you as the IT service provider, and you can remotely initiate a data restore from the Comet web interface as an administrator direct to the customer's PC without even needing a remote session. We'd all love it if humans were infallible, but just to be able to no stress, call up your IT provider or open the app, a few clicks to recover from backup. And that's really that as easy as it gets. And just knowing that you've done it before and knowing that it's just going to work takes all the stress out of the equation.
So, and Comet makes it easy for sure. I had another live stream at one time, and it was brought to my attention that those restores are actually billable items that the MSP can charge the client for. Testing the backup, that is a billable item. So, do you see that as something that's built in, or do you see that as a billable item as well?
A test restore? Well, I consider it a value add, I suppose. Right? It's a At the end of the day, that you're, as the IT contractor, IT service providers contracted to provide the backup service, and it's a question of responsibility in terms of, is it your responsibility to your clients to make sure everything's working? And that sort of gives you the mindset that no, it's not billable. It's just part of part of the service. But at the same time, if you're coming at it from sort of a low touch point of view, like I said, the high touch service providers that do everything, and the low touch service providers that sort of is the basic service, go sort it out. And in that case, it would be a billable add-on. I think most people land somewhere in the middle. They'll do semi-regular checks over things and be in contact with the customers. But
what's your recommendation?
How
often should MSPs be testing the restores of backups? Is it something that should be done weekly, daily, quarterly, yearly, monthly? What do you think?
Quarterly is probably pretty good. I think it depends a lot on the business. It's not something that you can really have a single rule of thumb for. The small companies file and folder, it's pretty easy to just browse through the files and the backup and make sure everything's there. But the larger environments, if you're backing up whole servers, disk images and things, if the customer's spun up an extra VM somewhere, then it's really the time consuming part is reaching out to the customer and making sure that, if they've got new laptops or new VMs, that you're aware of them and that they're being backed up properly.
Yeah, that does happen. Customer goes out and gets something and they fail to notify the IT provider, just expects them to know they've got a new machine, and it doesn't get protected. Something can happen to that. So let's
ideally
go back.
Ideally all those purchases would go through the IT provider, and the IT provider would be able to use their contract and make a little margin. But
in an ideal world. But all right, so let's go back and talk about I got another question for you that's top of my mind. So let's go back and talk about that Nvidia breach. Now, that breach happened, if I'm not mistaken, ultimately it was the employees who, is that what we determined?
Yeah. Yep.
So the breach kind of derived from originated with the employee. So we'll look at that as the human factor, the human element. What can MSPs or IT providers do to mitigate and kind of help combat that human element? What are some things, in your opinion, they can do?
There's two kind of categories here. One is employees who have recently been dismissed or something like that, former employees. And then there is employees who are currently active, but are dissatisfied, disgruntled, willing to, cause some havoc. And so we're talking about people who are behind, ransomware comes in something, there's all these layers, and we're talking about people who are behind the layers. They've got the credentials. They don't need to brute force any passwords because they've got a valid password. So they're in the engine room, really.
Yeah.
I'll start with what you do with ex-employees, because it's a bit more clear cut. When you offboard an employee, obviously all their credentials need to be revoked, their workstation powered down for the last time. Some of the things like shared credentials, I don't know about you, but it's pretty common to have a shared Bitwarden or 1Password or something full of credentials for the router or something that doesn't really have individual user accounts. And so you really have to try quite hard to not have shared credentials. Almost every service that an employee needs to use can do single sign-on, like LDAP or OAuth or Azure AD. And with Comet Server, our product, admins can log in via a domain joined LDAP account. So if your vendor doesn't support this, find a new one that does. And for those shared passwords, it's a real risk because you really want to rotate them all when someone leaves. If someone still remembers the password to the router, then what can they do if you don't change it after they leave? And so you want to have all the passwords in a password manager. 1Password, Bitwarden's the basic options. Up the chain, there's a bit more enterprise options, the CyberArk, the Dashlanes that you just need to rotate every single password when someone leaves, and it takes a bit of time to do that rotation, but it's obviously important. And my rule of thumb is every time someone leaves, you want to set aside half a day to go through that list of shared passwords and get single sign-on on as many of those services as possible. And with a rule of thumb like that, you'll be in a good position soon enough. There's something really interesting about software as a service vendors, and unfortunately, a lot of cloud software charges a premium for single sign-on. There's this great website called sso.tax that names and shames a lot of these companies that are putting what is a pretty basic security feature, federated logon, single sign-on login behind a really high pricing tier, and that's kind of unfortunate. But
so that's kind of like a website of shame.
Yeah, website of shame,
companies
exactly.
don't really want to. You don't want your company to be on that website. And what was that site again?
SSO.tax. I didn't even realize you can have .tax as a domain name, but you can. Yeah,
awesome.
and so the idea is that if every website was using single sign-on, then you just offboard your employee at one point, and everything would sort of follow from there. But there's so many other risks. If you have source code assets, in our case as a software development agency, or ERP assets, or if the former employee has managed to keep a copy of data post termination, that's something that you can't realistically rotate, and there's still that risk in terms of leaking personally identifiable information or anything else. There's some things you can do, but the best defense is just not getting in this situation in the first place. It's you want to just stay on good terms with people, and don't burn any bridges, keep the honest people honest, and make sure they've got good coffee breaks. And it's very, very hard to stop a personnel attack like that. And the even worse case is when they're still employed, because for a disgruntled employee, it's almost impossible to stop a real insider attack. They've still got that necessary access to do this job. And like you're saying, the lapsus attacks on Nvidia were pulled off by bribing staff members. The one interesting thing is that the people they managed to bribe at Lapsus were generally somewhat lower down in the organization, and they did have limited permissions to access different things. And the great thing about that is in larger organizations with auditing controls, you should have the on-call SOC notice when someone takes the first step outside their normal kind of behavior pattern.
Right.
An EDR will sort of monitor everything you do, go through the learning phase, and this person normally, uses these systems, uses this software, and oh, look, they've suddenly done something a little bit unusual, but by the time they've done one click, you've got these warnings, and by the time they've got the second click, you've remotely locked their workstation, and security's standing behind there. And but if you have that kind of level of observability with a really advanced EDR, then you should be able to encode those kind of rules directly into the permission system anyway. So I think this is something a lot of organizations struggle with at all sizes. Obviously smaller, where you don't really have the tools or human capability to enforce this kind of thing. But even at really large size organizations, Edward Snowden, the famous example, managed to smuggle all those documents out of the NSA. So I don't put too much stock really in plausible defenses against this. If Nvidia are breached, then you can move the needle, you can lock down permissions a bit, you can make it harder or less attractive for an employee to cause damage, but I don't think you can fully close the gap with IT as it stands today. And practically speaking, I think we just want to talk about locking down permissions as much as possible.
Yeah, so when we're talking about locking down permissions, how important is that to lock down permissions inside the backup software or the backup application? That's all. So that's equally as important. But yeah, you're right. You can't stop those employees from taking an external hard drive and copying the data when they have every right in their daily job title and duties to be accessing the data in the first place. So
exactly, the threat model there is very difficult to stop. Like you're saying with plugging in an external hard drive, a lot of government organizations will glue up all the USB ports and uninstall the USB driver to stop that one. But, there's always another way. The coolest, from a technology point of view, way I've seen to exfiltrate data from a network is to encode it in DNS requests. It turns out a DNS lookup can tunnel a fair amount of data. And who monitors the DNS lookups? I know I sure don't. So that's fascinating. But yeah,
I hadn't heard about that.
Very difficult to stop.
I'm going to have to look that up. That's interesting.
The most famous one is actually something called iodine. Iodine, like the chemical, and it's a way of tunneling an entire proxy through just DNS requests. So fascinating technology. Anyway, sorry, you asked me about locking down permissions in backup software. So this is backup software. We're just talking about locking down permissions,
Yeah.
and that just reduces the blast radius. The damage that someone could potentially do is reduced. So still talking from a staff perspective, staff who administer the backup software can do potentially quite a lot of destructive actions. If you logged into Comet backup as an admin, you can delete user accounts, you can delete backup retention data, you can deallocate entire storage locations, you can change the backup settings so no files are included. Change them so that old versions are only kept for 5 minutes instead of 5 months. You get the picture. There's quite a lot of destructive power there, and most of these settings can be turned on and off for different admin accounts. But realistically, you do need your staff to be able to make configuration changes to do their daily job. So you're going to need to leave a lot of these things open, and there is a risk for destructive behavior. It's just a little with great power comes great responsibility kind of situation.
Well, let's talk a little bit about preventative measures. Do you have any recommendations around, monitoring and early detection so that little problems don't turn into, little moles? They don't turn into big mountains, big catastrophe. What are some suggestions you have?
Sure. So, yeah, in terms of preventative measures, I guess one thing that I mentioned earlier was this cloud storage snapshotting feature that Comet can integrate with on Wasabi and Backblaze and with other storage providers. So no matter what, you've got that backup of a backup kind of situation going on, and that's an excellent preventative measure to have. That's a clear-cut recommendation from me. But as well as that, things, if you're talking about ransomware that encrypts a ton of files, or if you're talking about any of the other things we've talked about, a lot of the time there are early warning signals that if you were watching the right thing at the right time, you might be able to pick up on. And it comes back to those following your threat model. I'm thinking, if this happened to me, what defenses would I want in place at that time? And so ransomware is a great example for something that does have good early detection kind of systems, because it has a quite high IOPS load on the disk, because every file gets read, encrypted, rewritten, and so there's quite a lot of disk load. That's something you can monitor, and something quite a lot of EDR software is able to detect as it happens. That's sort of your general kind of use case. Preventative measures for backup software attacks, the things that I mentioned before about staff going in and deleting accounts, or perhaps not something intentional, but even accidental, like, the customers moved all their files to a folder that was excluded from backup, or they've set up a new laptop and all the stuff's on that. That's with Comet, you do get quite a lot of information around these kind of trends. You can see, this person hasn't uploaded any new data in a week or something, and we'd kind of expected them. Previously, they had this much kind of daily change, and now it's dropped to 0. That's something you can see, you can observe in our dashboards, and go call up the customer and ask them what's up. So there's plenty of situations like that. Yeah.
So I've got a last kind of question for you here, because we're coming up on the top of the hour. What are some safety features that IT professionals should be looking for when evaluating a new backup solution?
Yeah. I think I just really want to summarize up some of the main points that we've talked about so far, which is, first of all, just know your threat model. Think about what attacks you're trying to prevent, and how those attacks would play out, and put your defenses in appropriately. You can spend a lot of time and money on solutions that aren't really relevant for your customer base. We've spent this whole time talking about security, and I haven't once talked about the encryption that Comet itself does. Comet's got this great encryption system that, it's the good kind of encryption, not the bad ransomware kind of encryption. But I haven't spoken about it once, because it's just not relevant to the threat models that we've been talking about. So just make sure that the solutions that you're putting in place are relevant for some threat model, because you can spend a lot of time and money on something that's not relevant. But no matter what attack comes through, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a disgruntled employee, backup is always, your last point of call. So don't skimp on backup, but Comet is very affordable.
Good point. Yes, good point.
So, and in terms of the safety features that you would really want in your backup software, at the end of the day, I'll try and summarize it in a few bullet points. The first one is support for immutable snapshot storage, and this is something that the backup software isn't necessarily part of, because if ransomware is running with the backup software's credentials, then it's very hard to defend against. But just being able to work with one more layer of defense, which is that snapshot storage systems, including the lifecycle policies on Wasabi Cloud Storage and Backblaze B2 for that, backup of a backup, like you said, just that. It's literally impossible to lose your backup. In this case, it is 100% safe. And so that's fantastic. It's phenomenal. So that's one thing, the support for immutable snapshot storage. Next thing I'll say is a single sign-on and two-factor, obviously, for admin staff accounts. The ability to lock down permissions to reduce that blast radius. I have one more bullet point that we didn't really get to talk about either, which is reduced Windows service permissions, which is, okay. I kind of glossed over it, but a lot of software will just install, and if you go look at their service, it'll be running as local system. And that could be the difference between, this PC being infected and the whole network being infected. So when you install Comet, it makes some deliberate steps to lower its permissions. It creates like a mini Windows virtual account that has the bare minimum permissions needed for backup and pretty much nothing else, which is a really important security measure, because it reduces that blast radius, really. All of these things are about reducing the blast radius and making it much more less likely that an attack will do more damage in a larger area.
Well, that's very interesting. I didn't even realize that Comet created an additional user when with very limited access, just to bare bones necessities. That's impressive. So Comet has actually gone through and thought of all these things in advance, and when you deploy the solution, it's deployed in a safe manner.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we do try and take very seriously. It's not always easy for us, but it's just that concept that making sure that the backup is going to be there for you at the end of the day. When a ransomware attack hits, you might be a bit bruised and beaten, but if you've got a backup, you'll come out alive.
Yeah, that's. I would rather have a backup than not a backup 100 times over. So that can mean that backup can literally mean the difference between the company surviving or not surviving an incident. So
it's a lot of responsibility, and we take it very seriously.
Well, and so should the IT professionals who use and deploy Comet. They should take it seriously as well. So, well, Mason, any last thing you want to share with the audience?
If you're interested in Comet, we just make backup software. I know there's a lot of backup software vendors out there, but I hope you'll give us a chance. We've talked about security today, but Comet has a lot of other interesting features in terms of where deduplicating, where there's great compression. It's incremental forever, so you never ever need to do a full re-upload. It supports cloud storage, and best of all, it supports all of these things at the same time, which is something we're very proud of. So if you want to sign up for Comet Backup, get a free 30-day trial, and if you enter the promo code ITBOG, ITBOG, will be an additional $50 free credit for you to try out our software.
Awesome. That's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to have this meeting. I know your time is very valuable as the Chief Technology Officer, and we'll have to do it again.
Yeah,
we'll schedule another one of these. With you. Always a pleasure. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, Mason.
Absolutely. Talk to you later.
Care. We'll see you. Bye-bye.